Hey, beautiful humans. Welcome back to the Scenic Route. I'm Jen, your Swiss sociologist, mental health advocate, and host. And today, I got a really juicy conversation for you that's going to change the way you scroll, think, and share. I'm sitting down with Dr. Brie Kara, a psychologist who's about to take us on a fascinating journey through the world of misinformation and disinformation. Our phones currently ping with breaking news every 5 minutes, and all our social feeds are like a tsunami of opinions, thinly disguised as facts. So, how do we know what's real anymore? What is true? And why does our brain sometimes fall for things that aren't true, even when we consider ourselves to be pretty smart cookies? Dr. Bree is going to help us understand the psychological magic tricks happening in our minds, breaking down those mental shortcuts we all use, and give us some practical tools to navigate this never seen before information landscape without losing our sanity. We'll be relearning how to think critically in a world designed to bypass our rational thought. Essential skills we all need, and we all should refresh for sure. So grab your beverage of choice, find that comfy spot, and let's get ready to upgrade our brain's operating system together. This is one conversation you don't want to miss. This is the Scenic Route. The journey to truth might have some detours, but the view is always worth it. So let's go.
There's a different way to think about mental health, and it starts with slowing down. Sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home, and that's exactly why we're taking the Scenic Route. Hi, I'm Jennifer Walter, host of the Scenic Route podcast. Think of me as your sociologist, sister in arms, and rebel with many causes. Together, we're blending critical thinking with compassion, mental health with a dash of rebellion, and personal healing with collective change. We're trading perfectionism for possibility and toxic positivity for messy growth. Each week, we're exploring the path to better mental health and social transformation. And yes, by the way, pretty crystals are totally optional. You ready to take the Scenic Route? Let's walk this path together.
Dr. Brie Kara is a doctor of psychology and an expert on the psychology of disinformation and deep fakes. Dr. Brie worked in government service for over 20 years and served as a professor at the National Intelligence University, teaching national intelligence strategy. Dr. Brie moved to Germany in 2017 and transitioned to running her own business called Forecasting for Success, where she teaches others financial literacy and how to achieve financial independence, along with exploring how or why someone might be stuck financially based on their money habits through the lens of astrology. Brie, welcome to the Scenic Route podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, I am so excited. I'm really glad that you're kind of like my GPS for navigating like this current really foggy times of fake news, wild claims, and personal experience masquerading as like facts and science. And like, we need to talk about this.
Absolutely.
I'm really glad that I have you as a research psychologist to guide me through this.
It is a messy, messy time. Fog is definitely the right word for it.
Yeah, right. It is. So I feel before we like kind of go into why our brains, like how they work, that we end up believing others' bullshit and often also our own bullshit, need to kind of like make a distinction or look at what is information, what our brain understands as information, and how we like also can work with that in terms of what is disinformation and misinformation.
Yeah, that'd be a perfect place to start. We can go over the differences between the two first, and before we get into the mental gymnastics.
Perfect. Hey, like take us away. What do we need to know before we go into like looking at why do we believe certain things to be true?
Absolutely. So a lot of people will believe or misunderstand that misinformation and disinformation are interchangeable, that these are words that mean the same thing, but they're actually two very distinct and different things. So misinformation refers to inaccurate information that's shared with others just due to a mistake or negligence. But once you make the person aware of their bias or aware of factual information to make a correction, then the corrections are made. An announcement will be made, an update will be made just saying, hey, there was some misinformation. Here's the correct factual statistics or data. Disinformation, on the other hand, though, this refers to false information that is purposefully and covertly spread with the specific intent of misleading or deceiving people in order to influence public opinion or obscure a truth because harm is meant to be caused. There's something very specific and purposeful that the person that has created the disinformation wants to happen. And the reason why it's disinformation is because it's not good. If it was good, if they had positive intent, then they would tell you what the positive intent is. There would be no need to use deceit or to hide this. So this is why people who have the resources to launch and sustain a disinformation campaign are so dangerous, is because there's a big difference between just a person shouting lies and nonsense just into the wind versus having teams of bad actors who can lead a populace down a path to their own detriment without that group of people even being aware of what is happening to them, or at least not having enough resources or enough of them in order to stop it.
Yeah. And when we see so much concentrated wealth right now as never before, which is kind of like the perfect breeding ground for just pushing your own narrative as disinformation.
Absolutely. It's very frustrating that the resources that we have available in modern day, like the internet and social media, it's really not being used on a macro scale in order to genuinely provide assistance and help to populations.
Okay, so I think it like for our daily lives, this difference really matters. Like just to kind of like see there is a malicious intent with disinformation, and you not remembering something correctly is not like disinforming the public. Like there is really like something else, like there's something entirely else going on. And like if we're now, I mean, you mentioned the web and social media, right? Like what are subtle or less subtle red flags that might signal we're looking at disinformation versus, I don't know, just a very passionate person sharing how they see the world?
Absolutely. So one of the red flags that you can look for is someone with the resources in order to sustain the lie. So if a person would have the influence, the reach over a very large population, money, things of this nature, it would be important to pay more attention to what they're saying, because very often it starts with a thread of truth. And that's what makes it so challenging to confront it. And we'll get into this in a moment, because mentally, whatever you hear first is what you believe. That's your foundation. So if someone's able to get to you first and begin with the thread of truth, but then lead you down a very specific path, a path of disinformation, if you will, this is the very, very tricky part.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point. If there would be no shred of truth whatsoever, I think more people would spot it as bullshit or conspiracy or whatever. But it's kind of like no fire without smoke, or like there's always like this nugget that is true or rings true, where you're like getting hooked and then be like, oh, okay, yeah, if that okay, but you're not seeing that the rest is like on purposely deceitful.
Exactly. Yes, because it takes too much energy in order for us to strongly pay attention 100% for the whole thing that a person's trying to relay.
I'm just like fucked anyway because of social media and general like mental load and what's going on. It's
Yes,
right? Capacity to engage with information is scarce.
100%. So if everything in the beginning sounds good enough, mentally we do check out, because that's the way our brains are meant to function. Because if you were 100% paying attention all the time, we would get exhausted way too quickly. We would not be able to function optimally that way. And so as long as things sound good in the beginning, people kind of tune the rest out. And then when someone else comes along and they're like, oh my goodness, I have had the time and energy to pay attention. This doesn't sound right to me. Unfortunately, usually we get defensive. We as humans, we get defensive and we're like, well, it sounded good to me, but you only heard the very, very beginning. You may not have as much information as the other person. And this
Mm,
is where all the debates and the criticality comes in.
mm. You kind of brushed on an important thing, right? On how we like we just kind of like how our brain process the information. Like we're checking out and then just like browsing through it. Like it feels like this might be a good moment to hook into um Kahneman's concept of the two systems of thinking and how our brain process information, right? Because they are very distinctive and um yeah, just very distinctive and they're not like better or worse, like they're not meant to be judged against each other, right? Both are useful, but we're kind of like we have some difficulties with each and every one of those system one and two. Like how
Yeah.
how do we, if we're like, we already said, okay, if something is sounds good at the beginning, we're kind of like start processing it right away. So, but how do we process? Like, how do we think? How does our brain handle that?
Yeah, 100%. And I agree with you. When it comes to heuristics and mental processes, they're not bad. They're actually neutral. And that is a misunderstanding sometimes when people like myself are discussing misinformation and disinformation and how our brain processes that. It's not a critique of the heuristics. It's just we have to pay special attention when it's time, when we should remind ourselves, hey, I need to engage in critical thinking. So let me back up, like you said, and just lay this all out in plain language. So when it comes to heuristics, these are mental shortcuts. That's all that fancy word refers to. So what this
shortcut we got? Okay, good.
Exactly. It's just a fancy word.
Okay.
When it comes to the mental shortcuts, what happens is our minds will blend our own personal experiences with other historical information that we have available to us. And this is where our minds blend all this experience together in order to create problem solving techniques that we believe we can apply to our everyday lives. So these are really quick, very quick engagement answers and resources that we have mentally available for us.
Okay. So every one of us has kind of like their own kind of like brain's version of life hacks.
Exactly. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
It's meant to be real quick, real easy to access, and not a lot of mental energy or effort has to be put into this. And that really quick, automated, unconscious, if you will, effort is referred to as type 1 or system 1. It's the really quick, easy button, and our brains love that. Because research shows us that our brains will actively avoid resource demanding cognitive processes. So unless we practice and keep up to date our critical thinking skills, we default a little too often to the easy button. And this is where it can get tricky with believing the disinformation if we're not practicing our media literacy and our critical thinking skills.
Yeah, makes sense.
So whenever we get into system 2 or type 2, this is what the media literacy skills and the critical thinking skills are. It means that we're actively engaging in, as Kahneman puts it, as you said, thinking about thinking. You're actively aware that you need to process the data and really break it down 100%. And that's type 2. So that's what we want to remember to use whenever we believe that someone might be trying to pull the wool over our eyes.
It already sounds exhausting, right? Like it might make sense that this is not, I mean, that our default might not be accessing system 2 because it sounds like it requires much more energy from our bodies, and our bodies are kind of like more designed to maintain energy in general and not like spending it excessively. So this makes sense.
Yes, 100%. It's surprising how much mental effort and focus it takes in order to make very deliberate and slow decisions, to go slow and meticulous and methodical with our thinking. It actually takes a lot more effort and energy than what someone might originally estimate.
Oh, okay. We're going to go into that for sure because I think I want to first look into system 1, and already you kind of had it mentioned a bit about these like the fancy word is heuristics and
Yes.
the rule of thumb or kind of like what we have. And I think it's important to kind of like go over maybe the 4 or 5 like most important ones so that we kind of like know what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think before we jump to the critical thinking techniques, I think what's really interesting about type 1 is that it has the capacity to force the answer in some situations. So when you're
How so?
Yeah. So when your brain is actually unsure of an accurate answer, especially when the information is inconsistent with the person's worldview,
Mhm.
which again, when I say worldview, this refers to the mental foundations of who we are and how we believe the world works.
Yeah.
So when someone encounters something that goes against how they believe the world works or who they are, this is when bias kicks in. And this is what makes us susceptible to the disinformation, because now the logic or the conclusion that could be used, it's not quite right. So the person being able to recognize or talk about their bias, it does depend on how big the gap is between objective reality and the person's bias or belief. So the bigger the gap between those two things, then the stronger the person is likely to cling to their belief, no matter what evidence you have to provide to them. And this is when people double down on their belief in disinformation, is because the campaign started with a thread of truth that matched their worldview.
Okay.
And so they continue down that path of disinformation. So when someone else comes along later and tries to stop them and say, hey, this isn't right, we shouldn't do this, etc., that's when they defend the disinformation and protect it rather than being willing to admit their lack of knowledge or that their bias has kicked in and say, okay, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so to avert a loss of face, potentially, and admitting I was wrong, which no one likes to do, I get
Yes.
it. They rather become an agent of the disinformation itself.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Exactly. And you'll see this more and more as talking about disinformation is more in the public realm. It's more of common language and common knowledge to admit, hey, I think that this is happening, is people get very frustrated and a little sad, to be honest with you, that they're trying to help others and say, look, here's some facts, here's some truth. This is how a different choice would help you more. And it doesn't matter how much evidence, how much truthful information they can get that person to access, they still want to cling to the disinformation. And it's due to this type 1 and these biases and these worldviews kicking in.
So you need to go all the way back to trying to support them seeing the world in a different way, which
Exactly.
you would need to like reverse years and years and years of conditioning.
Yes, exactly. It's very complicated, which is why I'm so passionate about this area of research, is that at the moment we lack efficacious macro countering techniques. There's not a box of resources, if you will, that we can very quickly grab to try to stop the disinformation. One of the only things that we have is something called the inoculation theory, and it's actually very rare to be able to use it. What it means is you have some type of warning to know that disinformation is coming. You know that a campaign is about to start, and you're able to warn the people, warn the populace beforehand.
Okay. It's kind of like an ad disclaimer, like this post is sponsored or something.
Exactly.
Okay. Gotcha.
And
We're
it's
back
so
to,
rare.
like, more simple language.
Exactly. And
Okay.
unfortunately, it's just so rare to be able to do that.
Well, I mean, you would need to know exactly person X is planning to launch a disinformation campaign, like T-3 days on this platform, which
Exactly.
seems, yeah, no.
Yeah. Not
But,
really possible.
No. It's a nice theory on paper, but it probably proves very hard to
Yeah.
to actually like do.
in real
One
life.
of the only examples that we have is when the U.S. intelligence community was able to warn of the impending Russian invasion of Ukraine. That's honestly one of the only examples that we have, because like what you were saying, anything else is just too unlikely. It's too unrealistic to warn people beforehand. A distant second technique is using humor. So you are able to make fun of the disinformation and just be like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe this guy, and draw attention to why it's so ridiculous. And using humor is shown to have an effect. It is shown to lessen the strength of the disinformation.
Yeah. I feel this. I mean, yeah, I agree. Humor seems to be like a really great way of doing that. But again, like, it probably would only be effective if your platform is as big or bigger as your opponents, right? I mean, if I don't know, the president of the United States, I'm not gonna say his name.
We can mention past ones.
Yeah, we can mention past ones.
That's more
fine.
relevant.
Right? But like, I mean, any president, it doesn't matter, right? And I, when my teeny, tiny, weeny, tiny platform would be like, ha ha ha, using humor, right? Like it the proportions are completely out of control, right? I think humor could only work among like more or less equals.
100%. Yes, exactly. Yep.
Okay.
And
So we're back to square one. We don't like, from a scientific perspective, from the scientific community, we currently have a really hard time going at disinformation on a macro level.
Exactly. And so that's why informing people how critical it is that they remain engaged with media literacy and their own personal critical thinking techniques is all we have. And it's so important for people to keep those skills up to date, to keep those beefed up, in order to prevent these campaigns from, reaching in and clutching onto a populace and negatively affecting them.
Yeah, because as you've said, once they kind of like get a little hook inside you, it's almost kind of like too late, because it will require even more like mental strength to kind of like unclaw and get back out again, right? Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, okay, then how, with this flood of information and this fog of disinformation, how can we maybe, what does it make sense to first talk about how can we train media literacy, like you said? Or are you like, no, Jen, we actually need to talk first about critical thinking?
Oh, no, it's perfect. I think it's also a great idea to start with the media literacy.
Okay. Then, Brie, what the fuck? What can we do?
I got you. Let's get right into it.
Edit.
So media literacy, this is the process of enhancing your critical thinking skills via learning how to more thoroughly analyze, evaluate, and communicate message information. So what this is referring to are educational programs that are designed to reduce the harmful effects, the media effects, and prevent risky behaviors in a populace. So technically, media literacy is a type of critical thinking, but it does deserve its own highlight just due to the topic.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So one example of media literacy is being aware of your own personal biases, because we do have them. That's just a part of what makes us human. None of us get to go through life without having bias. And so it's just really important to say, hey, I'm human. I have bias. This is what I think my biases are. That way, in case you come across something that triggers one of those biases when you are reading literature online or watching videos online, that at least it's a mental reminder to where it is a useful and helpful mental trigger, if you will, to your brain realizes, oh, wait a second, I recognize that. I need to switch into type 2 or system 2 thinking.
Okay. Well, but how, I can already like hear listeners at this point, but Brie, how can I know my own bias, right? Because this is now also where blind spot theory comes in. How do I know what I don't know?
Yes, that's a very good point. So what we can do is just go with an easy example.
Please.
So for instance, if you believe that you're personally really far to the left politically or really far to the right politically, that would be an example of a bias. So just recognizing that that's one of your biases and that's the type of information that you go for.
Yeah, for me, I know this bias. I'm proud of it. It's okay. I'm a left snowflake. I can live with it. It's okay. Come at me.
Yeah, same. I'm right there with you. So one of the things that we can do in order to mitigate this bias is to say, okay, if I typically access news and read news that's really far left, for instance, what you can try to do is engage with very reliable and centrist sources and compare it to what you usually read. Okay. So this can help you explore not only your own biases, but also the biases of your typical news source or information source, and whether or why you've been missing some key data points that can help you make more informed choices.
Okay. And in all of this, I'm just wondering, like, how do other mental models like cognitive dissonance or self-fulfilling prophecy play into this, right? I know when I'm looking, when my personal worldview is conservative, let's go with that, I might look for more information that kind of like confirm my conservative worldview, that kind of like reinforce me in my belief that conservatism is what I want for life.
Yeah.
Do they play, like, do cognitive dissonance or self-fulfilling prophecy, do they play into that? Or is it like not something that kind of like fits into what we're currently talking about with information?
Oh, you're totally right. It 100% is part of this puzzle, and it definitely plays into it. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So for example, with cognitive dissonance, that is part of that worldview that I was talking about. And your brain really does perceive it as a threat, a true threat to cause you harm. And that plays into the mental model of why people are so resistant to factual information. Because if the brain perceives its foundational information, foundational being, like who you are as a being, as being threatened by this other data, it's perceived as a real threat to your personhood, who you are, and it will actively resist any other data that does not maintain that foundation. And this is why you can't just sit down one time with a person and present to them useful and helpful information and say, hey, I'm helping you out. Here you go. And someone someone being like, oh, not a problem. Let me completely realign my worldview and build a whole new mental foundation. And it's
okay. So it goes then more into like cognitive behavioral therapy, or really like you need to actively change over and over and again. Okay.
Yes. And that's part of the frustration for researchers, is that there's no macro way to do that quickly and successfully. You can do it one-on-one.
There's no macro way to do anything quickly and successfully. I mean, as a sociologist, let me tell you this.
Touche.
Psychology is wishful thinking.
I think it's just frustrating because disinformation is such an easy button. Like, how come it works the bad way?
My 5 years of studies were nothing but frustrating.
Oh goodness, no! That you're totally right. Yeah.
But
so, like you're saying, you can sit down one-on-one with someone and eventually, over time, help them out. But it would take so much time and effort.
Yeah, and if they want to be helped, or if they like.
Yes.
If they are open enough to be like, hey, right, I'm open to having a discourse.
Yes.
And I feel this is currently very much not the case anymore. Goes for both sides, right? I also like, why should I want a discourse with people who want to who are actively endangering the lives of people I love? But it's really hard to kind of like soften this up and be like, no, well, we actually need a discourse.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. It's why having strategists, people who are genuinely trained on strategic communication, are so important. Because the more consistent you are about your own messaging of, okay, this is what's really happening, or this is how we're trying to help you as a populace. That's why that's so important, is to repeat that over and over and over again. Because the better we can be at strategic communication, the less effective disinformation campaigns are.
Yeah, makes sense. I want to go back to media literacy, like on how to improve oneself's media literacy. We said, okay, we need to like be aware of your own biases, and that, my friends, requires you have to know yourself. You have to like really look at all your shit and be like, hey, maybe I think this because of. Is there other steps we can take to improve our media literacy?
Yeah, sure thing. Another really helpful media literacy technique is to understand the difference between news and entertainment. So being very cognizant and aware of what those two distinct types of data are is really important. It's important from a mental baseline perspective, and also decisions that are relevant and necessary to come from factual information and not entertainment. So it is really important in these moments to seek out data from news sources, for example,
Yeah,
and not be
news sources.
and not be forming any foundational beliefs or decisions from pure entertainment.
But I mean, here I already hear like all the marketing people and the audience know there are a few. But what about like, I mean, we know this, and we already have like hybrids of like infotainment to make people listen to news more if it sounds fun. Like like I don't know. We also created loads of this mess. Like how do we get out of that? Right? Because so many people tune if they hear this is the 8 o'clock news. Like they were already like tapped out.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. That's a really good point, and also a really good question. So whenever people do have the mental energy and capacity, what they need to do is take a moment and just say, okay, have I gone to the actual source of the information, or have I just heard it second and third hand from other people? Like you're saying, these infotainers. So if we have a true decision to make that affects us on a political level, when it comes to who our government representatives are, healthcare choices, things that the politicians are voting on and acting on. Yeah. Have we truly gone to those sources? Have we gone to government sources to see what our governments are saying, what the politicians are saying, et cetera, whoever the decision maker is? Have we compared the original data from the decision makers, or are we just repeating what we've heard through our local news, through these infotainers, et cetera? And so it's that distinction that's really important.
Okay. Can we also, I mean, this is a lot of work, right? Can we also kind of like, I don't know, crowdsource this? Can we like establish people that we know we trust their body of work? Or can we crowdsource this in, I don't know, in our community? Because we cannot keep up with everything and like source check with everything. Like I feel this is already giving me a headache.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I love that you actually brought that up, because establishing trusted community members is one of the best things that you can do in order to just benefit from a local perspective and as a person. And so I can share a resource with you to where people can go to make sure that they're receiving more factual news sources and information, if that's useful for listeners. And 100% agree to look into local resources to see if there are people who are already doing this to the benefit of the local community.
Okay. Yeah, who are surely or usually a good green flag is their NPOs, I'd say.
Yes.
Okay. Are there other ways how we can improve our media literacy?
Yeah, there are other ways that we can do that. And that's a perfect bridge, because it ties into our other critical thinking skills that play into our media literacy. Exactly. So another example that we have of using critical thinking as an to exercise it, if you will.
Yeah.
And this is to identify our personal strengths and weaknesses. So you can apply this to yourself, or you can apply it to a situation, etc. And so what you do in comparing the strengths and weaknesses of either yourself or a situation, it's meant to be an active mental thinking process intended to help you identify, again, biases that you may have that are skewing your answer into a less helpful area. It's meant to help you be more objective in your assessments and reach a more helpful conclusion over a decision that you have to make. So that plays into the first example that we talked about biases. If someone's having trouble, if they're not quite sure how to pinpoint biases, making a little list of strengths and weaknesses of yourself or a situation, this can help highlight that for them.
I love that. Yeah, that's is something really actionable that everyone can do in a couple of minutes and just be like, hey, ooh, okay, good reminder. And you're like, oh, I've already done this, Jen. Do it again. You grow and evolve, bitch. Do it again. Okay, so you've already said media literacy is a part of critical thinking, and I know I'm kind of like this is now like, let's talk about critical thinking, and this is kind of like, this is triggering me because that was one awful class I had with that we like the School of Sociology had with the School of Philosophy together. And boy, you do not want to be in a class full of philosophists. It's a nightmare. That's probably what psychologists say about sociologists. But hey, it's fascinating. But I was like, okay, okay, no, like, give me a fucking break.
We've all got our comfortable groups.
So, critical thinking. How do we even start untangling it so that we can make a space for it, so we can like cultivate it again?
Absolutely. I love that question. That's a great question. I'm actually going to share my favorite example that I really encourage people to engage with whenever it comes to beefing up and improving their critical thinking skills. And it's called judging and adjudicating. And what this means is to write a list of pros and cons for both sides of an argument. And what this exercise does is it's meant to help you see things from a new perspective and open up new opportunities or new decisions that you may not have reached otherwise on your own.
Okay, yeah. So it's really okay. Yeah, makes sense. So you're getting to see the difference between I'm judging and I'm thinking critically, right?
100%. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the judging side typically tends to have more biases, more unconscious thoughts, old beliefs that we have. That's typically what comes up in the judging column for people, especially if they're lacking true depth of knowledge on whatever the topic is, whatever the argument is. And it's meant to highlight this, because normally that list would tend to be pretty short, and that would highlight to you, okay, maybe I don't naturally have true, like deep, in-depth knowledge of whatever this topic is. Because the adjudicating side is meant to be more objective. It's meant to be more fact-based, that type
Logical,
2 thinking.
Rational.
Yes, 100%. Exactly. And so if the list is short, just, for the sake of argument, that's to highlight to you, I need to go get more resources.
I need to get more data points. And
yes,
so I can form more of a more rational, thoughtful, logical, open-minded.
Yes, a more holistic picture of true pros and cons with more factual information. And hopefully, again, this is when we add another layer of media literacy. It would also encourage you to go to multiple sources, trusted sources, not just, far right or far left, for example. You would try to go to those more centralist, trusted data sources.
Yeah. For me, I don't know if that's scientifically correct, so feel free to be like, nah, Jan. I always feel judging versus critical thinking. A telltale sign for me is I feel judging is very ego-driven. Critical thinking is more mission-oriented, right? It's not about having wanting to be right or wrong, but kind of what's best for the cause.
Absolutely. You're 100% right. Yes.
Okay.
And there's it's important to understand a time and a place. There's a time and a place where it's okay. We're making a personal ego-driven choice just for us in our personal situation.
Sure.
If you're not harmed, others aren't harmed, go for it.
Go for the Ben and Jerry's.
Absolutely. It's just not appropriate to use that type of thinking for all situations, especially when it affects others.
Yeah. And that's sometimes here I'm like, but often can we, I mean, with some decisions, right? It's pretty clear, okay, this will affect others. Mm-hmm. But often it's not in the rush of things. Is it always very obvious that this will affect others?
No, because that requires the type 2 thinking. And for all of us, myself included, like I said, none of us are exempt from this. Our minds default to the type 1. And so sometimes we just have to make a real quick decision right in the moment. And then it's only later on to where we have the time and the space to engage in that type 2. And that's when we realize, I could have made a better choice. So that's like a huge problem. Like I do also like coaching, and that's a big problem for especially smart people who are like, oh, I should have known better. And looking back, yes, right. But in the moment, when you don't have the past data points to refer to, you don't know. Yeah. I totally agree. We're all just doing the best that we can in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's how we learn and evolve over time, is being able to look back and reflect and think, okay, I could have done better. Next time I will do better. So I always try to highlight to people, whenever we speak of heuristics and these processes, it's truly not a judgment, because this is just day-to-day life. It's only highlighting when it comes to disinformation in this instance. It would be better for all of us if we do try to just take a breath and think more critically when it comes to this area of our lives, since we are being all affected on a more day-to-day basis. And that's the unfortunate part. It's this exposure to the disinformation so consistently and routinely, almost day to day. That's what's negative. It's not so much our type of thinking or decision-making processes.
Yeah, 100%. You've shared one model on how you would like to train critical thinking. Is there another way or another kind of like nugget of wisdom you would like to share when it comes to really, make it easier on yourself to put on your critical thinking cap?
Yeah, absolutely. Another example that I can provide is whenever you're using your sources, your media sources, information sources, when people have the time, I also encourage them to pay attention to who the authors are. Are you seeing the same author over and over and over again? Or are you being exposed to a variety of authors across different types of information spectrums? So when people do have the capacity to go deeper into their research of their information sources, it's important to make sure that whoever's authoring the information that you're ingesting and making a part of your worldview, that these are respected and credentialed experts or authors, whatever's, respective to their appropriate field. Because this can also help highlight any potential biases or people who are being less than truthful in their writings.
But this is already like a huge thing where like social media algorithms really work against us, right? Like when we, I don't know, influencers, we see them a lot, then we're quick. One of those like heuristics that is to, okay, we see them more, so we believe that this is legit.
Yes.
If we see something is shared by many people, like a post by someone, we might assume it's true because we see it so much. There's like this availability.
Yes. Yeah, that's when the availability heuristic kicks in.
Okay.
100%. And so whatever you're most often exposed to or have access to, by default, that becomes what you believe.
Yeah.
And so Another thing that kicks in is this concept of othering. People don't want to be the other. They want to be a member of the in group. And so if the content that they're consuming and being exposed to most often is in one group, by default over time, you want to be part of that group. Even if you might not 100% technically agree with everything, or you might have made different choices, or you might have reached a different conclusion.
Your community wiring is just too strong to override.
Yes, exactly. And so it's really important to try to be aware of what you're consuming, especially over time, to not by default end up in this group that is more difficult for you to disconnect from.
Yeah, it feels like we're describing a cult.
For some people in this realm, it can go down that path, unfortunately. So we just we want to prevent that.
Yeah, ideally, if we can. But yeah, it really is just kind of like the consistent day-to-day exposure. That's kind of like, hooking you in unconsciously and giving you also all other sorts of things. And we usually only talk about like the comparison of like that if we watch social media influencers, for example, with all their consumerists bullshit, a lot of us tend to like feel envy and like, oh, I want this too. So this is, I feel, more of a side we talk about. And what you said is something we're talking less about, which is even more critical to like the broader scheme of things. So thank you so much for sharing that.
I really appreciate you having me here so I can talk about this, since I am so passionate about it, and hopefully it helps some listeners out. So thank you.
What is, I think I want to quickly before we end, talk more about the different heuristics, right? Like there's something I often fall into myself. If something looks legit, it must be legit, right? Like if, I don't know, a website looks really well made, or if, I don't know, if the dude is wearing a really fancy suit, I'm like, he must know what he's talking about, right? Like, I don't know, is that like one of those heuristics as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it definitely plays into the fact that people, let's see, how can I explain this? It's just easy. It's easy to make those real quick, rapid decisions and choices in the very beginning. Like you're saying, we're so visual. And so when you first look at someone and they have it all together and they appear very confident and very sure of themselves and what they're presenting, not only how they look, but the information that they're saying, there's no gray area. There's no reason on that very quick first glance to second guess or immediately default to, oh, they're up to something, or there's something nefarious going on here. If at very first glance it looks good and it sounds good, then it's easy for our minds to just say, okay, I agree. Everything's good on this side too. And so it's not about living suspiciously or anxiously about everyone and their intentions. It's just reminding yourself to be open to, I might have to make a different choice as new information comes in.
Yeah.
So if someone looks good and they sound good, it's okay to remain neutral. Yeah. Maybe don't immediately on first interaction with this person, put them into a good bucket. Maybe they can just remain neutral for a little bit.
Yeah.
And as you gain,
such a good point, right? We have a neutral bucket too. We don't have just a good or bad bucket. We also have just like a neutral bucket.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And so it's just reminding yourself to be open-minded, that it's okay to make different choices as more information comes in over time. It doesn't mean you were wrong. We're all acting on the best that we have at that time.
Yeah, right. It requires like a certain humbleness to be like, yeah, that was wrong. That's okay. Like I fucked up, right?
Right. And it's okay to blame them. Like if someone truly is coming at you with disinformation, that's on them. Yeah. Like you should be proud of saying, hey, I'm recognizing disinformation. I'm going to make a different choice now.
Yeah. I got tricked. That's okay. And kind of like, that's what we talked about before, right? Like in hindsight, yeah, we know now we were tricked, but it wasn't obvious that time.
Exactly.
And we always have this belief, this bias that past events were predictable. In fact, which is like, yeah, okay, sure, we do. And this is hard, as even harder for smart people. And I mean, it takes one to know one. So I feel you. So I don't know. So we again would if it looks good and if we judge it to be good. I mean, basically goes back to stereotypes, right? We make judgments
Yes.
stereotypes, and for better or for worse, right? If we have stereotypes for danger, and we have stereotypes for must be trustworthy.
Yes.
So to really check that, and there are loads of different ways you can go at that, but really kind of like do that. Then we have what you already said, kind of like anchoring bias, where we rely too heavily on the first piece of information. If that's sounded true or had a little nugget of truth, and then we just run with it. And we have this like exposure thing. If we see something a lot, may that be a certain person or a certain information shared over and over and over, we feel like, oh, okay, this must be legit.
Right. Absolutely. So it goes back to what you're saying about checking in with ourselves, being open-minded, having a little bit of humbleness, and that we can get better over time. We can become more knowledgeable over time and make better decisions over time. So it's okay for what we're choosing in that moment. And there's always the opportunity to even choose better the next time if we've been open to additional information along the way.
Yeah, and I think it's really crucial to realize, hey, okay, I have these two systems, and I tend to be way too sure of my own judgment, even if I lack evidence. And like it has a place and a purpose, and I don't know, to kind of like be mindful of. We always like to believe we're so rational, but we're not, right?
No,
We're not.
no, we really are not. No, that's so surprising from the research is that almost everyone, most of the time, is making intuitive, emotional decisions. Even if we convince ourselves that they were based purely on logic or this is a logical decision, unless we truly sit down and slowly go over every detail, for almost all of us, it's purely instinctual. It's reflective. It's type 1.
That's really insane though, right? Like even yeah. And I mean again, I'm also someone often who's like instead of asking, I don't know, the difficult question, I don't know, is this investment a good long-term choice for me financially? I'm like, what does my gut think? Which is like super scientific. But right, it's just yeah, it's we're often really irrationally.
Yes. And I hope no one's being too hard on themselves because for most of human history, that's been okay. It's really been okay to live that way and to think that way and for us to make decisions and choices that way. What we're experiencing now is unprecedented. It is unprecedented to be exposed to this volume of disinformation, this volume of misinformation, even coming at us from so many different sources and angles.
And over such a long period of time in such a high volume, right? Like it's non-stop, it's ongoing, 24/7.
Exactly. So if we're just talking about normal, old-fashioned day-to-day living, it really is okay just to be engaging in type 1 most of the time. So again, it's not a criticism or anyone or our decision-making processes.
Yeah.
It's just drawing attention to the unprecedented situation specifically. That's all. Where we need to be more purposeful on remembering, okay, this is new, this is different. I do need my system 2 or my type 2 for what's happening over here. Yeah.
I really love that you said that because we are here on the Scenic Route are definitely not in like the shame and blame game. And it's really, we first, like, this is all very new-ish. So we have I don't know, we haven't really figured it out yet, right? Like there's research happening, but we all don't really know, right? As you said, there is no macro solution or macro way on how to approach this yet. Like the research, the research is being done, and I feel until we have that, it's you start from the individual and engaging in more critical thinking until it kind of like ripples outwards.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I agree with you. I encourage people, please continue to use your instincts, please continue to use those gut feelings. Those are important. It's just when it comes to our data sources and our decision making, when it comes to this world, this information world that we're now exposed to, that's when we need to be more thoughtful about our type 2.
Yeah. Is there one final thing you would like, I really want the Scenic Route podcast listeners to know this and to assure this?
I do. Thank you. That's a really good question. And it's kind of a 2-part answer.
Okay.
And so I do want people to, no matter where they are or what they're experiencing, it's really important to have hope about their own agency and hope about what they're capable of, regardless of their situation, whether it's currently difficult or not. And also how critical it is to maintain a trusted community. So if they don't currently have that, if they don't have trusted people within reach to them locally in their communities, I would highly encourage them to start forming those connections, because it's those two things that really get us through any difficult times that people might be facing.
I could not have said it better, because it is very true. We need community now more than ever, and we're seeing it being destroyed daily. So yeah, this is really an act of defiance. We become more ungovernable when we are rooted in community.
Exactly.
So Brie, thank you so much for being on a Scenic Route with me, for nerding out on how our mind processes information. If people want to know more about you, like, where can they find you online?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have loved being here today. So thank you for this opportunity. If anyone would like to find me online, all of my handles on all the social media platforms is at Brie Kara. And if anyone is interested in the work that I do for my business, they can find me at forecastingforsuccess.com.
Perfect. We will link that in the show notes. So if you have any questions, like, I'd say go find Brie online, and she will definitely nerd out with you on all things System 1 and System 2 and why do I believe my own bullshit. Brie, thank you again for being on a Scenic Route with me.
Thank you so much.
And just like that, we've reached the end of another journey together on the Scenic Route podcast. Thank you for spending time with us. Curious for more stories or in search of the resources mentioned in today's episode? Visit us at scenicroutepodcast.com for everything you need. And if you're ready to embrace your Scenic Route, I've got something special for you. Step off the beaten path with my Scenic Route affirmation card deck. It's crafted for those moments when you're seeking courage, yearning to trust your inner voice, and eager to carve out a path authentically, unmistakably yours. Pick your Scenic Route affirmation today and let it support you. Excited about where your journey might lead? I certainly am. Remember, the Scenic Route is not just about the destination, but the experiences, learnings, and joy we discover along the way. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you on the Scenic Route again.